Hey guys, it's Kevin. I'm here for the series premiere of Moon Knight. This is season 1. I think it's gonna have a first. I think this is only the first season. I don't know if there's gonna be a season 2, but you know, just in case, season 1, episode 1, the Goldfish problem. And this show, we focus on Stephen Grant, and he is this very, like, mild-mannered British man. He works in, like, a gift shop of a museum and things like that, and, you know, one day he comes across these Egyptian gods and realizes that he has, you know, taken some sort of artifact from one of these gods, and eventually comes to the conclusion that it's not him that has taken it. It is another personality. He actually has very bad dissociative identity disorder, and in doing so, we start to uncover more of what's really going on. Or at least that's the best way I think I can describe the show just from this first episode, because holy shit, going into this, look, I was honestly really excited for Moon Knight, and the biggest reason I think is because unlike the other Marvel Disney Plus shows that we've had, most of which I've really enjoyed, minus Falcon and Winter Soldier, I was not a huge fan of that one. But unlike the other ones, this show does not focus on a pre-existing character. From what I understand, none of the characters, or at least the major ones that appear in the show, are pre-existing characters. All of the characters that we're focusing on here are pretty much new characters, and that's something that is very exciting to me, because we have not seen a Disney Plus show where that has happened yet, and, you know, knowing that was the case definitely had me very excited. But the other thing that had me really excited is just the feel of this show seemed rapidly different than anything we have seen from the other Disney Plus shows, because this isn't a show meant to continue on, like, a character's legacy. This isn't a show that is trying to, like, you know, establish some sort of, like, continuity or things like that. This isn't a show that's trying to, like, you know, set up some sort of you know, sequel or anything. This is really a show that, for the first time, is its own thing, and that's something that really did excite me. And I have to say from this first episode, yeah, this is very different from what we've seen before, and I am very much excited for that. This was a really strong premiere, I think. I really liked what we ended up getting from this first episode, and I think if we're able to continue the quality that we got here, this could, without a doubt, be the best Disney Plus show we have gotten yet, but we're just getting into it right now. So as I like to do with these individual review episodes, I'm going to talk about everything that went down, which I am going to get into spoilers and whatnot, because there's really no way I can talk about this episode without getting into the spoilers. But before I do that, I do want to talk about some of the performances in this show and really talk about how everyone was acting-wise. And I will say right now, because of the fact this is only the first episode, and because of the way this episode was structured, I can't really say a ton about the acting aside from really just 2 performances. But I will say the acting here is top-notch, as it usually is in most Marvel shows. They do such an excellent job when it comes to casting actors, whether it be across their shows or movies. Really, they just are always knocking it out of the park in terms of casting choices. But I gotta say, casting Oscar Isaac for this role was some of the most inspired casting I think I've seen the MCU do yet, because this is such a multifaceted actor already. We know how good Oscar Isaac is with playing these kind of roles, but my God, he really blew me away here, because he has a very hard task to pull off. He's playing this guy who really is kind of like a host for all of these different personalities, and throughout this entire episode, he has to be, like, in denial. He has to be kind of clueless as to what's going on, and he does such an amazing job with that here. Stephen Grant is someone you latch onto immediately. A lot of it is because of the likability that Oscar Isaac really does give him, and I thought he just did a really great job throughout the show. And then towards the end, you know, we don't know a ton about the other persona of Mark Spector, but we definitely get the sense this is a much more, like, cold, very dark sort of persona, very different from, you know, the sort of just the sort of more positive sort of feel that Grant gives off. I think that's something that Isaac just did such an amazing job with. I think throughout the show, he really is going to show, I really think he's going to showcase just how dynamic of an actor he really is, and I really loved what he ended up doing here. Really just carried this entire episode very nicely. And the only other actor I can talk about here is Ethan Hawke, who, oh my god, I never thought I'd see the day where someone like Ethan Hawke, who mostly focuses on, you know, very sort of like indie type films, and sometimes he'll do like horror films. I never thought he would do something like this before, but my god, he is so good in this role as Arthur Harrow. We don't know a ton about him yet. He clearly is this, you know, cult leader of sorts, who is trying to, you know, be this healer, it seems like. He wants to sort of, like, cleanse the world of what's going on, but he also is, like, obsessed with this Egyptian goddess, and he immediately is such an intriguing character, and I hope that he is the villain for this entire show, because I've talked about before, that is the one thing I think a lot of Disney Plus shows have struggled with, is having a consistent villain and keeping that villain interesting. And right off the bat, if Ethan Hawke is our main threat in this show, if this, you know, if the character of Arthur Harrow is someone that we're going to follow along and he's going to be like, you know, the main antagonist, I'm definitely down for that, because I love what he is bringing to the role. He's such an interesting character. We know so little about him, but he already really fascinates me with what they're getting into with him, and I'm very excited to see where he ends up going overall. Okay, so with the acting out of the way, I do need to get into this first episode, which, again, this first episode is kind of difficult to talk about because, you know, something that they brilliantly did throughout this episode is really put us into this state of, disorientation. This entire episode, it's very hard to tell what is actually going on. We're kind of thrust into this immediately. We don't really know what's happening. The way things start off, you know, with Stephen Grant, him being chained to the bed, you know there's something off throughout this entire episode. You know, every single interaction he has, the way that they act around him starts to not line up, and so I think they did a really brilliant job of just putting us into the mindset of Stephen Grant, because while he is very sort of like oblivious to the world around him, we also are. We don't know what's going on. We don't understand why characters are referring to him by a different name or, you know, accusing him of things that we haven't seen him do yet. And I thought that was such a interesting way to start off this show, and I think that the way the episode you know, ended up going when it came to you know, the way this episode was laid out, I thought was really well done. I like that we start off and, you know, he talks about how he wants to be this tour guide of sorts, and he knows a lot about, you know, he knows a lot about Egyptian gods, that he really, you know, he wants to know more and things like that, and he really is just this guy working at a gift shop, doesn't really have a ton going on within his life, and so I thought that it was a smart choice to follow this character around, because we never would have expected someone like this to really be put through the ringer in the way that he is in this episode, because, my god, everything is just kind of going wrong for this guy. I mean, at one point, you know, he's constantly suffering from these blackouts of sorts, as we can see, and when he goes to sleep, he's suddenly in another country, doesn't understand what's going on. This is where he comes across Arthur Harrow and things like that, and, you know, him demanding this scarab of sorts, which, you know, clearly Grant has no idea what is going on. Again, I think it was a really smart choice to kind of put us in this environment with him, because again, we're just as confused as to what's going on. I like that we don't have that context. I like that we don't have, you know, those answers yet. I think it's going to make this show that much more interesting to watch and that much more satisfying once those answers are revealed. I like the fact that the show is being very careful and very patient with what it says and not telling us too much in this first episode, because I think that's the best way to tell a kind of story like this, something that's so like mysterious in that way, you know, really putting us in the head of Stephen Grant. I just really like the way that was all handled here, and, you know, eventually, you know, him, you know, coming across Arthur Harrow, who tells him he has this scarab of sorts, and he's nearly killed at that point, but we see that there's like this voice in his head, and we don't really know what is entirely going on there, and I think that whole thing was very interesting to watch. You know, F. Murray Abraham's character, we don't know what is he really about, why does he keep talking to him, you know, what's really going on when it comes to their overall, you know, sort of sort of bond in the show. Why does he talk to Stephen Grant in the way that he does? I just think all of that is very interesting to watch so far, because we don't get a ton of interplay when it comes to this sort of voice that he keeps hearing in the show, but you can definitely see that that's going to play a major role in things, as this goes on, and I thought that was something that was set up very well here. And eventually he wakes up in his home and realizes, oh shit, there's been 2 days that have passed. And I really like the shock that, and this was probably Oscar Isaac's best scene, was in the scene where he's, going on the date with that girl that he really likes, and, he calls her, he's very confused as to why she didn't show up. She's accusing him of being the one to break up with her, and when she tells him that, like, 2 days have passed, it's a real shock. We don't really know how this has happened. Why is time passing so quickly? Because it's not. It's not passing so quickly. It's just because we're in the head of Stephen Grant. It's clear that, time to him, he constantly feels like, he isn't really in control of what's going on. It was a really good hint that maybe he isn't the main sort of personality here. Maybe this isn't really about him. He's just kind of pulled into someone else's actions. I thought that was a really good sort of setup overall. And, especially the scene where he gets that call from this girl, Layla, and she's calling him Mark. We don't know what's going on throughout any of that either. Again, I think all of that was just really well set up here when it came down to, how this all does play out. Even scenes like him going to the pet store and him noticing something's off about the fish having 2 fins instead of 1, and the owner telling him that, like, she's already said this, and we never really saw that. Again, just a lot of interesting ways to, a lot of really good ways to tell this story and put us into the mindset of Grant overall, and the often maddening sort of, the sort of maddening uncertainty he has with so many conversations in this episode. But I think Stephen Grant on his own is still a really interesting sort of character, because this is the guy that you can see he wants to be more than what he is. He starts off the episode, wants to be this tour guide, and he's told, oh, well, you work in a gift shop, you hand out things to kids. Like, that's literally all he does. He's the one handing out, like, baseball. He's the one handing out, like, trading cards and things like that, and he doesn't really want to do that. He kind of longs for more. So while you can see, when he is getting himself involved in all of these crazy situations, while he's very overwhelmed, I think there's still that sense of thrill because of the fact that he is getting to kind of live out his dreams in the way. And I think that's what kind of latches you on to Stephen Grant, is that this is a guy that people are constantly, he's constantly getting punched down throughout this episode. And, we don't really know why until the end, of course. Then we know a little bit more of what's going on. But I think that made for such an interesting sort of lead character to follow here. But then, after this happens, you're even more shocked when randomly this woman calls him out of the blue. Not only is this someone that we've never seen before, but she's referring to him under a different name, of course, being Mark. And he doesn't know why she's calling him Mark or what she's really about. So what's really going on with her, I'm not really sure. Again, as usual, I don't know a ton about the Moon Knight comic and things like that, but I really like the way that we are slowly revealing that, again, there's something more going on that Grant just isn't aware of. And it's not because of anything he did, it's because of something else that's going on. I thought that was a really good way to sort of reveal to us, to sort of subtly hint at the fact that there's more going on here. I thought that was a really good way to do that. But of course, we get to the scene with him and Harrow when it comes to Ethan Hawke's character, who tells him, basically, kind of lays out an idea of what he's really all about. He's the servant of this goddess Amit, and he wants this scarab, which again, Grant is unaware that he is that he possesses. And this monster comes at, basically, comes at him, says, if you don't give me the scarab, I'm going to tear you apart. And just as he's about to be cornered, that's when we get the reveal, and we start to get a bit more of a peek behind the curtain here, which I think this was enough. Like, I've heard some people complain that we didn't get enough here because we were a little bit, we were a little too unaware of what was going on, but I like the fact that, again, they were telling us so little throughout this episode because, again, this was through Stephen Grant's perspective. They wanted to put us in the head of someone, and there's that moment where he looks in the mirror and suddenly we hear someone say, it's time for me to take control, and he just kind of agrees to it. All of a sudden, he is this full-on warrior who's just like slaughtering the monster. It is such a brutal way to wrap things up, but it is perfectly in contrast with sort of the calming, almost playful tone throughout the rest of this episode. A lot of this episode was very funny to watch because, again, Stephen Grant is not this warrior of sorts. He's just an ordinary guy that longs for more, and I thought that was just such a great way to start things off. I love the way this wraps up. I really like the story that they set up here, and I do think that was a pretty good way to end this episode overall. But getting more into the technical side of things, I think the directing in this episode was very well done. I've heard a lot of people say, going into this, that this show is rapidly different from anything we've seen from the other MCU television shows, and that it was more in line with like some of the Netflix stuff. And I would actually disagree. I think this is less like the Netflix stuff and more like something like Legion. Now, it's not nearly as weird as that show. I don't see this show giving us like, musical numbers and all these like trippy sequences. Like, I don't really see them doing that in this show, but I do see them taking us on a bit more of a journey, telling this very sort of challenging story, and I think the way this episode was directed was definitely the right way to go about it, because I get the sense that moving forward, this is probably not going to be the tone we get within the show. I think we're heading into something a lot darker, especially if Mark is now going to manifest more often, if he's going to be the one taking control. Because I kind of got the sense that, him saying, "Let me take control," is also hinting that Mark is going to be the focus of this show now, which if that's the case, I'm fine with that. But I think the way Mohammed Diab directed this episode was very well done, because again, it was definitely a lot more sort of, playful in that way. This episode was a little bit more lighthearted. There were actually some very funny moments, probably the funniest being when Grant is confronted by Harrow and he talks about avatars, and again, Steven, none the wiser, just thinks he's talking about the movie Avatar. I thought stuff like that, worked really well in this episode, and I really liked the directing and contrasting that with the more sort of darker, sophisticated sort of narrative that's going on. I thought, again, they just did such a great job directing this episode. It feels very different from anything we've seen. And again, I know it's very like cliche to say at this point that like, oh, this is rapidly different from anything the MCU has done, but this really, there isn't much I can think of that they've done that is anything close to what we got here. I mean, this is a very different kind of story, and I really like the way that it was presented. This is not an origin story of sorts. You're being thrown in the middle of it, but it's through a character that has so little awareness of what's going on. I thought was just a really bold choice overall, and I really like the way they ended up going about that here. I think the writing in this episode is also very well done here by Jeremy Slater, really just kind of laying the building blocks of what we need, but never telling us too much, because again, I've seen people complain that we didn't get enough information revealed in this first episode, and my answer to that is that it's the first episode. Like, this is the first episode of 6. I wouldn't expect for us to get this crazy, like, exposition dump yet. I think it's coming, but I don't think it's going to appear in this first episode. And I like the fact that it wasn't in this first episode because, again, you could sense that something was off. It kind of got you more into the vibe of the show, and it makes this such a more sort of interesting, sort of story, because we don't really know what's happening. We don't know how long Stephen Grant's been in control. We don't really know what's going on when it comes to Mark Spector, who's Layla. Why did Mark end things with this girl? Why did he take this artifact from Arthur Harrow? I mean, there's so many things that we are uncertain about. And I think if they would have started out the show with Mark Spector, there really wouldn't be that much of a mystery here, because we know more of what's, we know a lot more of what's going on, and that this is a man with dissociative identity disorder, and that sometimes, other characters, take control for a little bit. But I think doing it this way, now we know that, but I think doing it this way, we weren't able to tell throughout the majority of the show that Stephen Grant has multiple personality disorder until he was having these blackouts. They subtly hinted at it, and I think that was definitely the right way to go about it. My only real question is, what's going to happen with Stephen Grant? Like, are we going to see him more after this episode, or is he going to take more of a back seat to Mark Spector? That's something that I'm still a little bit unclear of, and if this is all we get of Stephen Grant, I will be a little bit disappointed, because I want to see more of this specific personality. I want to see him evolve. I want to see him, become more well-attuned to what's going on, more well-attuned to what his master is a part of in that way. I want to see more of what's going on there, and I hope we're able to, because I think there's a lot of interesting sort of avenues you can take that character, and I'm interested in seeing, what is really in store when it comes to all of that. So again, I think all the writing was very well done here. Again, the subtle hints, everything, I just thought was really well done. Hell, even the Goldfish, the way the Goldfish was acting at certain points, I thought was a really good way to kind of, tie everything together. When it comes to the cinematography, I think the show has a really nice look to it. Again, it definitely has a somewhat similar look to other MCU shows, but the fact that there's no, references to anything really, and especially what we get at the end of this episode, it just feels a lot more adult in that way, and that's something I really did appreciate about the show. They are clearly going for a much different audience here, and I think that's really going to work out in their favor, because it's going to make this show stick out that much more. This isn't just a run-of-the-mill sort of MCU show, especially in terms of the way everything looks. I think all the action sequences were really well done, but by far the one at the end was the one I'm going to remember the most, because it was incredibly brutal, and it was not something that we're really used to seeing, within the MCU. It's not always just someone's caught in the middle of something and has to evade, all these different obstacles, which is the majority of what we got here, but that ending hints at something a lot darker, and that really does excite me. So I really like what we got in terms of cinematography and the action sequences here. Another great action scene is when he's with all of those attackers, and there's that moment, you don't know how he's going to get out of the situation, and he just fucking annihilates all of them, and you can just see just how shocked he is by this. This is not something that he thought he had the ability to do, and again, just hinting that there's something more at play here that he is not fully in control of. I thought that was just such a good way of setting all of that up. I also really like the recurring song throughout this episode of Every Grain of Sand by Bob Dylan. It was something that every time it came up, it kind of told us, oh, it's a different day. Oh, Steven's kind of going through, the same routine over and over again. Started to feel a little bit repetitive and monotonous in that way, because, well, Steven's life is kind of monotonous. He is constantly waking up, and, he's going to work, and he's trying to, flirt with this girl, and it doesn't really seem to be working out. And I thought that was a really good way to sort of, get us into the mood of sort of what this character goes through, give us an idea of his life. I thought that the score was very well done here. I really like the main score we get here too, especially in the end credits of this episode. Really good stuff overall. And the way this episode was paced, I thought was also very well done. I like that, when Stephen Grant is blacking out, the screen also blocks that. I thought little choices like that worked out very well in this episode. I thought the whole show was very well paced in that way, and I never really found myself bored or anything like that. Again, my only real issue with this first episode is I'm just really hoping this is not all we get of the Stephen Grant character, because reviews I've read have kind of said like he isn't in it as much after this, and I hope that's not the case, because I really like this setup. I think it's a good way to introduce us to this world, introduce us to this very unique sort of story. I think they're doing some interesting stuff with that. And I do think that there were some moments that did feel a little like too MCU generic stuff, some of the action sequences here and there. But overall, I was a big fan of this first episode. I really like the way things are heating up here. I really like the way that this episode was set up. I think it's a very intriguing sort of concept. You know, what's the full extent that this is really going to go? I think there's so many places they can take this show, and I'm very excited to see them really dive deeper into all of that. I think this was a very, very strong start for sure. So I'm definitely going to give this first episode of Moon Knight, episode 1, The Goldfish Problem, an A-. But other than that, guys, this is my review of the first episode of Moon Knight. Let me know if you guys saw this first episode overall, loved your thoughts, and I'm very excited to review this show weekly. I wanted to do it for Hawkeye. It just never fully materialized, but this was a show that I was hyped on my mind for. It's easily the most anticipated, like, MCU show for me this year, so I definitely made a point to try to do this one weekly. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.